Welcome to the Popish Plot. I'm Nate.
I'm Jessica.
And I'm Mike.
Today, we're here to talk about 3 American saints?
Well,
3 saints of the Americas.
yes.
Oh, okay.
They're all
That
from-
makes more sense.
They all lived much of their life in North America.
But they weren't born here.
Well,
not that should be a discriminating thing. I'm just...
Apparently, some of our co-continentalists take some umbrage at the fact that we call ourselves Americans as if we're the only ones. Because their theory being, we live on North America just as much as you do.
Yes. So we have one who was American citizen.
Canada had its chance, all right?
I agree with you.
Listen, we had one who was an American citizen but born elsewhere. We have one who was born in what became the Americas. And we have one who was Canadian, but we're from Michigan, so there are neighbors to the north and east and south. So, it's... I'm not going to argue against that one. Plus, I made a nice 3 in a row because their feast days are the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th in America.
Boom. It's very exciting.
Woo!
So, who are these 3 heroes of the faith?
So, on the 4th, we have St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. On the 5th, we have St. John Neumann.
Or Neumann.
Neumann, yes. On the 6th, we have St. Andre Bessette, whose feast day is the 7th in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Because traditionally Epiphany is the 6th.
Yeah. All right. So the first one, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton.
Now, this is a name all of us have heard, mostly in relation to schools.
Yes.
There's Seton Hall University. There's Seton everything. Seton.
She did make the first Catholic school for girls in the United States.
Nice.
And she was born in New York City, in what was then the province of New York. In British America.
1774, so just before the Revolution.
Yes. And then she ended up dying in Emmitsburg, Maryland, in what was then the USA, because she passed on January 4th, 1821.
So not a tremendously long life, but a good one.
Yes. Well...
just shy of 50 years.
An important one.
Yeah.
She had a lot of hardship in her life.
Mm-hmm.
She was raised in what then became the Episcopal Church, because, again, it was Church of England.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then there was a revolution.
Mm-hmm. Then we got all uppity and rebelled.
Yep. She was married, and her husband died, and she eventually ended up becoming Catholic. And she wanted to go and provide stuff for the various girls and stuff she saw. Mm-hmm. And it's much like in anything else in church. If you have the idea, you are now volunteered for it.
Yep. If you say, hey, I think somebody should do this.
That's why I like to work from the shadows and just be...
Yes.
He says that, but he has so many jobs.
Yes.
That's why I need to be whispering in other people's ears now.
So, yes.
Oh, lesson learned too late.
She was raised very wealthy, but she ended up spending her life taking care of schoolgirls, and she founded the first religious organization for religious sisters in America.
Hey!
Called the Sisters of Charity.
Mm-hmm. Who are still with us today and continue their good works.
Yes.
Now, we have to remember, at the time, converting to Catholicism was a huge deal.
She literally had to find, the bishop for the Americas.
Mm-hmm. And that's partially why some of her stuff is in Emmitsburg, Maryland, because the Bishop of Baltimore, and that's where the Catholic presence was centered.
Yes. She has I think a shrine in Maryland, and then another building in New York City that is across from the Staten Island ferries depot. When we went to New York with Nate's family, we quickly walked past it, and because I was playing Pokemon, it was a stop, and I'm like, oh, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. This seems interesting. Oh, darn it, where'd they go?
Where'd my Pokey go?
No, not the Pokey. The rest of her family.
They kept walking.
I didn't have the train tickets back home.
It was important to stay with them.
Yes. Yes. On the 5th, we have St. John. I will let you pronounce the Germany name because I pronounce it Englishy.
Well, I mean, it's fine to say Neumann. We
just think of the British one.
It's better to say Neumann to avoid confusion with now St. John Henry Neumann. So, St. John Neumann.
Yes. He was born in 1811 in a city in what was Bohemia of the Austrian Empire at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he died January 5th, 1860 in Philadelphia, PA.
Hey!
Ooh, excellent place to go. Maybe not where I want to die per se, but
Well,
It's a nice place to visit. You just wouldn't want to die there.
I mean, if I can avoid it, I mean, realistically, I'd like to not die anywhere. So I mean,
anyway, so he was very good at school. He went to school even past the age in which most people stopped going to school and became, workers and stuff. And while he was at school, he eventually felt the call to become a priest, and he learned that in America, they needed German-speaking priests.
Because we had a large German immigrant community who weren't being served.
Yes, and although he was born in what is now part of, like, the Czech Republic, German was his main language. Now, by the time he moved to America, he knew, like, 8 languages, including German, Czech, Italian, Greek, Latin,
One of those
English.
one of those polyglot geniuses.
Yes. So,
Now, is it true that they had enough priests where he was, and that's part of why he went overseas?
that was part of it because he was very disappointed that they did not make him a priest at home so that he could then have his first mass with his family and stuff. Because they're like, we have enough priests. If you go to America, they might need some priests, but we're not going to...
Think about what a wild world that is, where your bishop says to you, no, we've got enough priests.
And you're like, literally, I'll leave as soon as you come and make me a priest.
have you considered going to the frontier?
To mission territory. And we're very grateful he did.
Yes.
So he came over to the United States. He was finally ordained a priest.
Yep.
And then nothing else important happened, and he lived an ordinary life.
Well, very similar to St. Elizabeth, he also was very involved in the school system. He made the first diocesan school system.
Nice. And it's important to remember, back in the day, the schools weren't they weren't as secular as they are today. At the time, they would essentially teach you Protestant theology. So that's why there was such an emphasis for Catholic education, because they didn't want the children to be taught, wrong theology.
Yes, there were 2 things that the public schools at that time were good for. One of which was making you American. Yeah, teaching you English. We don't speak that other language here. You speak English. And as there was a large period of time in American history when all good Americans were Protestant, they were good at making people Protestant as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, which is why whenever I see a friend from church who's like, we need to bring back prayer in school, I'm like,
whoa,
last time we did that, it was directly against us. Like, I don't care if after school you have all the programs you want. The people who are like so upset because the Satanists did something after school, let them. They just look like idiots when they do that.
They're trying to stop those kids from saying from praying to Mary.
I went to the public schools. I don't really want the public schools teaching kids how to pray.
No.
They did a bad enough job on history, math, and science and such.
History, math, science. Yeah, those are the ballpark.
Geography wasn't so bad. The problem was the map kept changing at that time, with the end of the Cold War and whatnot.
Oh, we just had the maps from, like the 70s, so none of those things changed. We're just like, this is now its own country.
This big red blob, yeah, that's now like 15 different countries. Don't worry about it.
I remember having to do...
You're never going to go to half of them. You won't need to know about them.
I remember having to do the history and stuff report on Poland when the map that we had to draw was like this super complicated chicken. Mm-hmm. Now it's just like a few colors.
So...
Most
of
them end in Istan.
Yes, but anyway.
One final note about St. John Neumann.
Okay.
There's a great deal of excitement about who will be the first native-born American male saint. Mm-hmm. We already have an American male saint, but he was born, again, in Bohemia.
Yes.
And still an American, and that's great, because we're a nation of immigrants. But it will be exciting when the first native-born American male is canonized.
Yes, along with being the first U.S. citizen canonized that was a male, he was also the first U.S. bishop. Which also reminds me, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton was the first American canonized that was born in what is now the U.S.
Nice.
I mean, There are some other ones. I'm fairly certain that, the Native American saint lived much earlier than her, but I didn't bother looking it up.
Well, and
And then she spent a lot of time in Canada, too.
yeah, and the North American martyrs, some of them died in what is now the United States, some in Canada, but none they weren't from here.
Yeah. Which gets to our last one because he is Canadian, but,
Oh, Canada. So, tell us more about Andre.
Quit being such a hosiery.
How's it going, eh?
All right. Well, St. Andre Bessette was originally named Alfred. Mm-hmm. His name changed when he became a priest.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think he was a priest. He was just a lay brother. But when he became religious.
Yes. Okay. What? I have detailed notes of 5 sentences here.
Well, no, it's just some religious orders, they just give you a new name. He got to be Andre, which
was super close. Like, I was reading through it, and it took me a minute to be like, wait, that's different than his given name.
Yeah, well, it's they're both yeah.
Anyway, he was born in 1845 in Mont Saint Grégoire, Quebec.
Oh, wow.
And died January 6, 1937 in Montreal.
So, pretty modern.
Mm-hmm. In fact, although he was not U.S. American, he did live 4 years in Connecticut, where he worked in a textile mill with various relatives.
Mm-hmm. Now, to me, the really impressive thing about Saint Andre is none of it was about him. Like, he was this incredible miracle man. So many people were cured from him visiting them and rubbing holy oil on their wounds. And all the time he's like, no, it's not me. I'm not doing anything.
Yes. He insisted it was Saint Joseph the entire time. There was a illness that broke out. He was a nurse for it. Apparently, no one died that he was in charge of the care for.
So you're in the ward. I want him.
Yes. Which resulted in problems with his, religious order. Because he spent most of his time as being a porter, and he was also a sacristan. He worked in laundry. I found a quote from him that I just find amusing because of, the number of saints who started out as porters. When I joined this community, the superior showed me the door, and I remained there 40 years.
Yes. Now, Mike has mentioned before, and we were discussing it earlier, about how it would seem as though being the porter was some sort of an easy shot for getting oneself made a saint.
I'm just saying it increases the odds, and Saint Andre is one of my examples.
I mean, there's a lot of saints that were monks and nuns, but you hear about a lot of ones who are porters, and they can't all have been porters. That was just like maybe 2 people's job. I imagine occasionally they had to let them off and let someone else be a porter. And go to meal.
And once again, it's something that's going to be fairly particular towards your disposition. So if you're going there looking for fame and fortune, you will not find fame and fortune working the door.
Well, no, but it strikes me as the Lord tells us to seek the lowest place, and that's one of the lowest places. So it's going to predispose you to better imitate our Lord.
You would certainly hope so.
But anyway,
so much of what we do is aspirational.
Exactly.
Yes. So after he was the best nurse on the entire ward.
No, not me. It's St. Joseph.
Yes, he got very famous, and a lot of people were writing him letters. He would get thousands of letters and everything else. And he was also in a order that was working like they ran a school. Mm-hmm. So eventually, the superiors were like, we can't just have all these random sick people showing up all the time. You're going to get the kids sick. So then he had to go and move to a nearby place where he could then go and pray for all the sick people and insist that he wasn't doing it. It was St. Joseph. Mm-hmm. But, he quickly got, healing miracles for some reason after his death.
Well, but what I really love is, so in his room, in the monastery or whatever, where they lived, he had a view out onto this big hill in Montreal. And he was like, one day, I will build a monument to St. Joseph there. And then they did. And it's frigging enormous. It's this huge shrine to St. Joseph on Mount Royal or something in Montreal. It's it's enormous. It's now an icon of the city, and people still visit it today.
Yes.
great.
I mean, for this year of St. Joseph, that would be a great idea, except for we can't go to Canada just for fun.
Maybe the border will be open by December? Maybe?
Maybe.
By next December?
Maybe?
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, we can look at it on the interwebs.
I find it interesting.
We have the Popish Plotter fans of people looking at things over the interwebs.
Yes.
So, this week, consider learning more yourself about St. Elizabeth, St. John, and St. Andre.
Who all lived in the general area near where you probably live if you are an American viewer,
And they're important reminders.
as defined by the New World.
St. Elizabeth was born in 1774. That's just before our country was founded. St. Andre died in 1937. We all know people who were born before 1937. Mm-hmm. So the saints don't have to be people from long ago who lived far away. They can be people just like you and me, living where we live, living when we live.
Yes, and although St. Andre was a porter, which is the lowest job, St. Elizabeth grew up in a family that apparently brought over the first, Stradivarius violins, so pretty fancy.
Yeah. So, being wealthy, and this is especially good to talk about with St. Catherine Drexel, is not an obstacle to holiness as long as your priorities are still right.
Yep. So go down below, hit the like button, the subscribe, and the bell next to it so you get notified when we have new episodes. And if by some chance you have perhaps a lesser known saint that you'd like us to dig up some facts on, go down in the comment section and let us know who that saint is.
Or maybe you know of a saint that has a little shrine or building somewhere, nearby where you're like, I didn't know about this saint, but then I went to this church and they had a whole thing.
Or maybe you're like us, and within an hour or so drive, you have at least one pilgrimage site that you can go to.
Mm-hmm. Eventually, in
the aftertime.
Well, we took it for granted when we could, and we'll go there eventually.
And until next time, remember to live your faith.
Love your faith.
And share that love.
USA and Canada. USA and Canada.